22nd of September 2014. It's a date I know I'm never going to forget. It's the day that I shared my story publicly online with my photo and my name for the very first time, ending 35 years of my silence. Sharing my story has opened doors for me in ways I could never have imagined. There's been newspaper and magazine articles. I've been invited to do radio and TV interviews, and I've written a book. And I'd like to take you back to just a few months before my book was published, when I truly learnt the power that can come when we share our stories, that in fact, we're not storytellers, but story healers. My publishers strongly advised me to hold back from doing too much publicity and media work, to save it to when the book was coming out, which made perfect sense to me. However, I was contacted by BBC Radio 4, and they were doing a programme for their one-to-one series about redemption, and they wanted to interview me. And when I heard who it was that was going to be my interviewer, I said yes straight away, completely ignoring the advice of my publishers. I was going to be interviewed by the legend that is Sir Trevor MacDonald. Wow. I mean, what would you have done, Sir Trevor? So they flew me to London, I went to the BBC studios, and I met Sir Trevor. And I'm not sure if any of you grew up with a dad like mine. He was obsessed with the news. He would watch at 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So meeting Sir Trevor was very surreal because his voice was so familiar to me. So we did the interview, which was great. It went really well. In fact, it was amazing. But to me, what was more amazing was what took place once my interview had been aired. A friend of mine got in contact to say her mother had been listening that morning. And when she went round to see her in the evening, she said she was very animated and keen to speak to her in a way she had never seen before. And she turned to her daughter and she said, "Sandra, I was listening to the radio this morning and I heard a woman speaking, telling her story. It was as if she was speaking to me." And she said, "Mum, what are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, she spoke so well, Sandra." And she said, "You know, we just didn't speak about those things in those days. I always thought it was my fault. I always thought that I was to blame. But she made me see it differently, that he was the guilty one." And she said, "Mum, what is it that you're trying to say to me?" And she turned to her daughter and she said, "I was raped too, just like the woman on the radio was when she was 13 years old." And in that moment, when my friend's 81-year-old mother shared her story, she ended 64 years of her silence. My friend says that there's a new space that has opened up, a bridge between them that was never there before, and her mum is more open in ways that she never used to be. She has seen the joy in her mum from connecting with a woman on the radio who understood. And she also thinks that if her mum hadn't heard me that day on the radio, she would have taken her story to her grave. And that made me think of all the other men and women out there that have been raped or abused and have locked themselves into a prison of silence too, that are too ashamed and too guilty and feel too concerned of being judged that they've stayed quiet. You know, every time I am asked to speak at an event, I think of her. She has single-handedly shown me the power that comes when we share our stories. She is my motivation, and she is the reason that I will continue to speak out. Thank you.